London, 1887. In a society where a woman's worth was measured by her youth, Lady Beatrice was considered expired goods. 27 years old, unmarried, invisible. But walls have ears and shadows have eyes. When her cruel stepsister laughed and called her past her prime in a crowded garden, she didn't know the most powerful man in England was listening. What happens when the Duke of Ice chooses the old maid, not out of pity, but out of revenge? You are about to hear the scandalous, true-to-life story of how a whispered insult toppled a dynasty. This is the story of Beatrice and the Duke. The air in the Rutherford ballroom was thick with the scent of hothouse gardenias and the heavier, cloying perfume of desperation. It was the height of the season, and every mother in London was trying to sell her daughter to the highest bidder. Lady Beatrice Wulfric stood behind a large potted fern near the terrace doors, sipping lukewarm lemonade. At 27, she had long since mastered the art of becoming part of the furniture. She wore a gown of dove-grey silk, a fabric of excellent quality, but a colour that rendered her essentially invisible against the wallpaper. She wasn't ugly, she simply wasn't current. Her dark hair was pulled back too severely for the frivolous fashion of the day, and her eyes, the colour of wet slate, held too much intelligence to be comforting to the average young lord. "Beatrice, stop lurking. You look like a governess waiting to be dismissed." The voice was high, musical, and laced with arsenic. It was Cecily, her 19-year-old stepsister. Cecily was a vision in pale pink tulle, her blonde curls bouncing as she fanned herself. She was the diamond of the season, and she knew it. "I am merely taking air, Cecily," Beatrice replied evenly. "The ballroom is stifling." "It's not the air," Cecily laughed, grabbing the arm of her friend, Miss Davenport. "It's the desperation. Poor Beatrice. Father says if she doesn't marry this year, he's sending her to Aunt Agatha's in Cornwall to tend to the sheep. Can you imagine?" Miss Davenport giggled behind her fan. "Surely there is some widower, a clergyman, perhaps." Cecily sighed, loud and theatrical. They drifted closer to the open terrace doors, unaware, or perhaps uncaring, of how far their voices carried into the cool night air of the garden. "Oh, we've tried," Cecily sneered. "But look at her. She's dry, my dear. Dried up, like a book left on the shelf too long, the pages turning yellow and brittle. She is past her prime. Who would want a bride who is practically a grandmother? A man wants a flower he can pluck, not a dead branch." Beatrice griped her glass so tightly she feared it would shatter. The humiliation burned in her chest, hot and acidic. It wasn't the words themselves, she had heard them before. It was that Cecily said them with such joy. "Indeed, door," deep voice rumbled from the shadows of the terrace, cutting through the night like a guillotine blade. "A flower is pretty to look at, certainly. But flowers wilt in a week. A sturdy branch, however, that can build an empire." The silence that fell over the trio was instantaneous. Stepping out from the darkness was a figure that made the blood drain from Cecily's face. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and dressed in severe black evening wear. His face was sharp angles and shadows, dominated by eyes that burned with a cold, terrifying intelligence. It was Sebastian Devereux, the Duke of Blackwood. He was the most eligible and the most feared bachelor in England. They called him the Wolf of Blackwood. Rumours followed him like a plague, that he had driven his first fiancée to madness, that he dealt in secrets, that his heart was made of granite. He ignored Cecily completely, walking past her as if she were a mild annoyance, a gnat to be swatted away. He stopped directly in front of Beatrice. Beatrice looked up, her heart hammering against her ribs. She expected him to mock her, to join in the fun. Instead, Sebastian Devereux bowed. It was a low, courtly bow, distinct and respectful. "Lady Beatrice," he said, his voice smooth and dark, like velvet dragged over gravel. "I believe they are playing a waltz, and I find myself in need of a partner who knows how to hold a conversation, rather than one who merely knows how to giggle." The ballroom had gone quiet. People were staring. The Duke of Blackwood never danced. "Your Grace," Beatrice stammered, her cheeks flushing. I do not think." "I am not asking you to think, my lady," Sebastian said, extending a gloved hand. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a second she saw something there. Not pity, but a challenge. "I'm asking you to dance. Unless, of course, you believe the gossip that I bite." Cecily made a noise like a strangled cat. "Your Grace, surely you are mistaken. Beatrice doesn't—" Sebastian turned his head, looking at Cecily for the first time. His expression was one of mild distaste, as if he had stepped in something unpleasant. "I did not address you, child. When men are speaking, children should remain silent. A lesson you have yet to learn." He turned back to Beatrice. "Well, Lady Beatrice, will you leave the flowers to wilt in the garden?" Beatrice looked at Cecily's shocked face. She looked at the crowd of judgmental peers. Then she looked at the Duke's hand. She placed her hand in his. "I would be honored, Your Grace." As he swept her onto the floor, the shockwave went through the room. The wallflower had just been claimed by the wolf. The morning after the ball, the Wulfric household was in chaos. Cecily had thrown a tantrum at breakfast, breaking a saucer. Lady Honoria, Beatrice's stepmother, was pacing the drawing room, smelling salts in hand. "He danced with her," Honoria muttered, looking at Beatrice with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. "The Duke of Blackwood danced with you. What did you say to him? Did you bewitch him?" "I said nothing, stepmother," Beatrice said calmly, buttering her toast. She felt a strange sense of calm. The worst had happened. She had been the center of attention, and she had survived. "He simply asked." "He was mocking us," Cecily spat, her eyes red from crying. "He did it to spite me because I laughed at you. It was a joke, Beatrice. Can't you see that? He'll never call on you." At that precise moment, the heavy brass knocker of the front door sounded. A moment later, the butler, distinctively pale, entered the dining room. "My lord, my lady, His Grace, the Duke of Blackwood, is in the drawing room. He requests an audience with Lord Wulfric and Lady Beatrice." Cecily dropped her fork. Beatrice felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Why is he here? 10 minutes later, Beatrice sat on the velvet sofa, her hands folded in her lap. Her father, Lord Wulfric, looked terrified. He owed money to half of London, and a duke in his drawing room usually meant debt collection. Sebastian stood by the fireplace, dominating the room. He declined tea. He declined small talk. "Lord Wulfric," Sebastian began, his gaze fixed on Beatrice. "I am a man of business. I do not waste time. I am looking for a wife." Lady Honoria gasped, pushing Cecily forward slightly. "Your Grace, surely—" "Not the child," Sebastian cut her off, his voice dropping to a freezing temperature. "I require a duchess, not a debutante who thinks cruelty is a parlor game." He walked over to Beatrice. "Lady Beatrice, I observed you last night. You are poised. You are intelligent. You possess a thick skin, a necessary trait for anyone entering my household. You are, as your sister so indelicately put it, past your prime." Beatrice stiffened. "If you came here to insult me, Your Grace—" "I came here to offer you a position," Sebastian interrupted. "I need a wife to manage my estates, to host my political gatherings, and to keep the vultures of society at bay. I do not need a love match. I need a partner, a strategist." He leaned in, his voice lowering so only she could hear. "And you, Lady Beatrice, need a way out of this house. I saw your face last night. You are suffocating here. Marry me, and you will never have to bow your head to your stepmother or that shrill sister of yours again. You will be a duchess. You will have your own money, your own power, and my protection." Beatrice looked at him. He was offering a transaction. Cold, hard, and practical. It was unromantic. It was brutal. And it was the best offer she would ever get. She looked at Lady Honoria, whose mouth was hanging open. She looked at Cecily, who was trembling with jealous rage. "What are your terms?" Beatrice asked, her voice steady. Sebastian smiled. It was a small, sharp thing, but it was genuine. Complete autonomy over the household, an allowance of £5,000 a year. And I swear to you, I will never mistreat you, but I will not offer you love. My heart is otherwise engaged with the past." "I do not need love, Your Grace," Beatrice lied, though her heart gave a painful squeeze. "I need respect." "Then we are in agreement." Sebastian turned to her father. "Lord Wulfric, I will have your solicitor draw up the papers. The wedding will be in 3 weeks. Special license." He took Beatrice's hand and bowed over it, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that lasted a fraction of a second too long. "Welcome to the pack, Beatrice." The engagement of the old maid to the Duke of Blackwood was the scandal of the decade. The tabloids went wild. The London Illustrated News ran a sketch of them, titling it "The Winter Rose and the Wolf." But inside the Wulfric house, the atmosphere was poisonous. Lady Honoria had gone from shock to calculation. She suddenly tried to fawn over Beatrice, but her eyes remained cold. She realized that Beatrice was about to become vastly more powerful than she was. Cecily, however, chose war. 3 days before the wedding, Beatrice stood in her chambers for her final dress fitting. The gown was magnificent, ivory silk with Chantilly lace, paid for by the Duke, as Lord Wulfric had claimed poverty. "It's too tight," Beatrice murmured to the seamstress. "I can't breathe." "Nonsense," Cecily said, breezing into the room. She was holding a cup of dark berry tea. "It looks perfect, though a bit plain, just like the bride." "Get out, Cecily," Beatrice said, tired of the fighting. "Oh, don't be like that, Your Grace," Cecily mocked. She walked closer, feigning admiration of the lace train. "I just wanted to see if the rumors were true." "What rumors?" "That the Duke is only marrying you to get access to Mother's trust fund," Cecily lied smoothly. "Everyone knows Blackwood is cash poor. He needs a dowry. Once he has it, well, accidents happen in that big, drafty castle of his. Just ask his first fiancée. Oh, wait, you can't. She fell off a tower." "That is enough," Beatrice snapped. Cecily shrugged, and then, with a calculated stumble, she pitched forward. The cup of dark berry tea, accidentally, flew from her hand. It splashed across the front of the ivory wedding gown. A massive, purple stain bloomed across the stomach and skirt, ruining weeks of work. The seamstress screamed. Cecily put a hand to her mouth, her eyes shining with malice. "Oh dear, how clumsy of me. I suppose the wedding will have to be postponed." "Perhaps indefinitely." Beatrice looked at the ruined dress. The old Beatrice would have cried. She would have run to her room. But Beatrice was the future Duchess of Blackwood. She calmly unhooked the bodice and stepped out of the ruined dress. She stood in her corset and petticoats, staring her stepsister down. "Leave us," Beatrice ordered the seamstress. The woman fled. Beatrice walked up to Cecily. She was taller than her stepsister, and for the first time she used that height. She grabbed Cecily's wrist. "Ow! You're hurting me!" "Listen to me, you spoiled little brat," Beatrice hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "You think ruining a dress will stop me? I would marry him in a burlap sack. I would marry him in my shift. I am leaving this house, and I am taking my share of the inheritance with me." "Mother won't let you," Cecily cried, trying to pull away. "Mother won't have a choice," Beatrice said, shoving Cecily back, "because if either of you tries to stop this wedding again, I will tell the Duke exactly how much gambling debt Father really has. I will have the Duke call in the loans. You will be on the street in a week." Cecily went pale. "Now get out," Beatrice said, "and tell the maid to bring me the silver silk. I will wear that. It suits me better anyway." As Cecily fled the room, Beatrice sank onto her bed. Her hands were shaking. She had won the skirmish, but Cecily's words about the accident and the first fiancé gnawed at her. Why did Sebastian choose me? Later that evening, a package arrived for Beatrice. It was from the Duke. Inside was a small velvet box containing a necklace of black diamonds and sapphires. It was heavy, ancient, and immensely valuable. There was a note. "My lady, I heard of the unfortunate accident with the tea. Do not worry about the gown. My mother's wedding dress has been altered and is waiting for you at the chapel. It is cloth of gold. It suits a queen better than a princess. P.S. Wear these diamonds. They are said to ward off evil spirits and annoying relatives." Beatrice clutched the note to her chest. He knew. He had spies in the house. She wasn't sure if that made her feel safe, or if it meant she was walking into a trap far more dangerous than the one she was leaving. The wedding had been a blur of gold cloth and hushed whispers, but the arrival at Blackwood Hall was a stark awakening. The estate was massive, a sprawling Gothic monstrosity of grey stone perched on a cliff overlooking a churning sea. It was beautiful in a terrifying way. Beatrice, now Her Grace, the Duchess of Blackwood, stood in the grand foyer. The servants were lined up, their faces impassive. At the head stood Mrs. Vance, the housekeeper. She was a woman made of angles and starch, with eyes that assessed Beatrice and found her wanting. "Welcome to Blackwood, Your Grace," Mrs. Vance said, her tone bordering on insolent. "I trust the journey was not too taxing for someone of your constitution." Sebastian had immediately retreated to his study upon arrival, leaving Beatrice to face the wolves alone. He had kept his word. He provided the house, but he left the managing to her. "The journey was fine, Mrs. Vance," Beatrice said, pulling off her gloves. "Please have a bath drawn for me, and I will review the household ledgers in the morning. I noticed the drapes in the east wing are moth-eaten. That will change." Mrs. Vance stiffened. The previous Duchess, God rest her soul, the Duke's mother, preferred the drapes as they were. We do not change things at Blackwood lightly. "Then it is a good thing I am not the previous Duchess," Beatrice said, her voice ringing clear in the stone hall. "I am the current one, and I prefer my house not to look like a mausoleum. Ledgers, tomorrow, 8 a.m. She swept up the stairs, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. For the next 2 weeks, Beatrice waged a silent war. She discovered that the ghosts of Blackwood were actually theft and neglect. The butcher's bill was inflated by 40%. The wine cellar was being siphoned off by the butler. She fired the butler on a Tuesday. She renegotiated the contracts with the village merchants on a Thursday. By Saturday, the dust was gone, the fires were lit, and the food was edible. Sebastian watched it all from a distance. One evening, as they sat in the library, the only room where they truly coexisted, Sebastian finally spoke. He was reading a thick legal tome, but his eyes were on her. "Mrs. Vance tells me you are a tyrant," he said. There was a flicker of amusement in his dark eyes. "Mrs. Vance was skimming £3 a month from the laundry budget," Beatrice replied, without looking up from her embroidery. "I didn't fire her, because she knows where the linens are kept. But I told her if it happened again, I'd have her arrested. She respects me now." Sebastian closed his book. He stood and walked over to a chair. The air in the room grew heavy. He reached out, his finger tracing the line of her jaw. Beatrice stopped breathing. "I told you I needed a strategist," he murmured, his voice low. "I did not expect a general." "Is that a complaint, Your Grace?" "Sebastian," he corrected. "And no, it is refreshing. Most women would have cowered before Vance." He leaned closer, and for a moment, Beatrice thought he might kiss her. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating. But then, a clock chimed midnight. Sebastian pulled back instantly, the warmth vanishing from his eyes. A mask slammed down. "It is late," he said abruptly, turning his back. "I must work. Good night, Beatrice." "Sebastian?" she asked, confused by the sudden shift. "Go to bed," he commanded, his voice harsh. "And remember the one rule I gave you upon arrival. You have the run of the house, but the north wing is forbidden. The door is locked for a reason. Do not go there." He strode out of the room, leaving her alone with the dying fire. But Beatrice was no longer the wallflower who hid behind ferns. She was a woman who had tasted power, and she knew that whatever was in the north wing was the reason Sebastian Devereux was a man made of ice. The storm hit Blackwood with the fury of a scorned lover. Thunder rattled the window panes, and the wind howled through the chimneys like a banshee. Beatrice could not sleep. The forbidden north wing had been gnawing at her curiosity. Sebastian spent every night there. Sometimes he didn't return to his chambers until dawn. Around 2 a.m., she heard it. It wasn't the wind. It was a sound drifting through the vents, a melody, a piano. Someone was playing Chopin, clumsy and halting, but distinct. Beatrice threw on her dressing gown, grabbed a candelabra, and slipped into the hallway. The house was dark. She moved silently toward the heavy oak door that separated the main house from the north wing. To her surprise, the door was slightly ajar. Heart pounding, she slipped through. The corridor beyond was cold, the stone walls bare. The music grew louder, coming from a room at the very end of the hall. She reached the door and pushed it open. The room was bathed in the warm glow of firelight. It wasn't a dungeon or a laboratory. It was a nursery, converted into a sitting room. At the piano sat a young woman. She looked to be about 20, with long, matted dark hair and a nightgown that hung off her skeletal frame. She was rocking back and forth as she played, her eyes vacant. And kneeling beside her, feeding her soup from a spoon, was the Wolf of Blackwood. Sebastian looked exhausted. His cravat was undone, his sleeves rolled up. He spoke to the girl with a tenderness Beatrice had never seen. "One more bite, Elise. Please. For me." The girl slammed her hands on the keys, a discordant crash. "No, he's coming. The man with the cane. He's coming to take me." "He is dead, Elise," Sebastian said soothingly, catching her hands. "He can never hurt you again. I promise." Beatrice gasped. The sound was soft, but in the quiet room, it was a gunshot. Sebastian spun around. When he saw Beatrice standing in the doorway, the tenderness vanished. His face twisted into a mask of pure, terrifying rage. He stood up, knocking the chair over. "I told you," he snarled, advancing on her, "never to come here." Beatrice didn't run. She looked from him to the terrified girl. "Who is she, Sebastian?" "She is none of your concern. Get out!" He grabbed Beatrice's arm, his grip bruising. "You have breached the terms of our agreement." "Is she your mistress?" Beatrice demanded, yanking her arm back. "Is this the mad fiancé?" "She is my sister," Sebastian roared. The confession hung in the air. The girl at the piano began to whimper. Sebastian flinched, his anger fracturing into desperation. "Elise," he whispered. "It's okay." Beatrice looked at the girl. Elise. She saw the family resemblance, but she also saw the scars on the girl's wrists, the haunted look of someone who had seen hell. "Everyone thinks she died in France 5 years ago," Sebastian said, his voice breaking. He didn't look at Beatrice, he looked at the floor. "She didn't. My father, he tried to marry her off to Lord Halloway. A monster. Halloway hurt her. Badly. She lost her mind. I killed Halloway in a duel, though the papers called it a hunting accident, and I brought her here. If society knew she was alive, in this state, they would lock her in Bedlam. They would cage her like an animal." He looked up at Beatrice, his eyes red-rimmed. The wolf looked like a wounded boy. "I married you because I needed someone to run the house so I could care for her. I needed a front. Now you know. Go ahead. Run back to London. Tell the world the Duke is harboring a lunatic." Beatrice looked at the man she had married for convenience. She saw the immense burden he had been carrying alone. The ice wasn't lack of feeling. It was a shield to protect the only person he loved. She set her candelabra down on a table. "You are doing it wrong," Beatrice said softly. Sebastian blinked. "What?" Beatrice walked past him. She approached the piano. Elise shrank back, whimpering. "It's all right," Beatrice said, her voice dropping to the soothing, melodic tone she used to use when reading to her younger cousins. She didn't reach out. She just sat on the bench, leaving a respectful distance. That was Chopin, wasn't it? The nocturne in E-flat major. Elise stopped rocking. She looked at Beatrice with wide, fearful eyes. I can't remember the bridge," Elise whispered. "I can," Beatrice said. She placed her hands on the keys and played the few bars Elise had stumbled over. Elise watched her fingers. Slowly, tentatively, she mimicked the movement. "Yes," Beatrice smiled. Just like that. She turned to Sebastian, who was standing frozen in the center of the room, staring at them as if he were witnessing a miracle. "She doesn't need a jailer, Sebastian," Beatrice said firmly. "She needs a sister. And you need sleep. You look dreadful." Sebastian let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 5 years. He slumped against the doorframe. "You aren't leaving?" he asked, his voice rough. Beatrice turned back to the keys, playing a soft harmony to Elise's melody. "I am the Duchess of Blackwood," she said. "We do not run from our own. Now, pull up a chair. I believe Elise plays better with an audience." That night, the wall between them didn't just crack, it shattered. But as Beatrice would soon learn, the danger to the Blackwood family wasn't just inside the house, it was coming from London, and it wore a familiar face. The summer heat had settled over Derbyshire like a heavy golden blanket, burning the mist off the moors and turning the grey stone of Blackwood Hall warm to the touch. For the first time in living memory, the estate did not feel like a fortress against the world. It felt like a home. In the 2 months since the revelation in the North Wing, the atmosphere within the house had shifted tectonically. The silence that had once suffocated the hallways was replaced by the faint, tentative sounds of life. Beatrice sat on a stone bench in the sunken garden, a book of Tennyson resting open on her lap. Across from her, kneeling in the dirt with a trowel, was Elise. The ghost of Blackwood was no longer wearing a nightgown. She was dressed in a simple, pale blue day dress that Beatrice had tailored for her. The sun caught the dark waves of her hair that was now brushed and braided. "The lavender is taking root," Elise said softly, her voice raspy from years of disuse, but steady. She looked up at Beatrice, her eyes clear. Do you think Sebastian will like it?" "He will love it," Beatrice assured her, smiling. "He loves anything that grows in this rocky soil. He calls it stubborn. Like him." Elise let out a small, rusty sound. It was a laugh. It was the most beautiful sound Beatrice had ever heard. Up in the master study, overlooking the garden, Sebastian Devereux stood by the window. He watched his wife and his sister, his hand resting against the glass. The lines of exhaustion that had etched themselves into his face for 5 years were softening. He had spent half a decade guarding a tomb, terrified that the world would find the corpse inside. Now he was guarding a garden. The fear was still there, the fear of exposure, of the asylum doctors, of the cruel judgment of society. But it was tempered by a fierce, burning hope. He had married Beatrice Wulfric as a shield. He hadn't expected her to become his heart. But peace, in the world of the aristocracy, is often just the deep breath before the scream. The sound shattered the afternoon idyll. It began as a low rumble, vibrating through the ground, then grew into the unmistakable clatter of iron-rimmed wheels on gravel and the crack of a whip. Beatrice froze. She looked toward the main gates. Blackwood Hall rarely received visitors. The Duke's reputation saw to that. "Elise," Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a command. "Leave the trowel. Go inside. Now." Elise's eyes widened, the old terror flickering back instantly. "Who is it?" "I don't know, but you must go to the north wing. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me or Sebastian. Run!" Elise scrambled up, her skirts gathering dirt, and bolted toward the servants' entrance. Beatrice waited until she disappeared before standing up. She smoothed her skirts, raised her chin, and walked toward the front courtyard. A carriage was pulling up to the grand steps. It was not a sleek town coach, but a heavy, travel-stained barouche piled high with trunks. Beatrice squinted against the sun. As the vehicle halted, she saw the crest painted on the door, a golden lion on a field of red. The Wulfric crest. Beatrice felt a cold sensation wash over her, despite the heat. The footman scrambled to open the door. A parasol emerged first, followed by a flurry of pink lace and blonde ringlets. "Good heavens!" a shrill voice cried out. "This place is positively medieval. Mother, do be careful. The steps look treacherous." Cecily. Beatrice stood at the top of the stairs, her hands clasped tightly in front of her to hide their trembling. Lady Honoria descended next, looking imperious and unhappy, shaking dust from her travelling cloak. "Beatrice," Honoria called out, as if she were greeting a servant who was late with the tea. "Don't just stand there gaping like a fish. Instruct the men to handle the trunks. One of them is fragile." Beatrice did not move. She physically blocked the path to the heavy oak doors. "What are you doing here?" Beatrice asked, her tone devoid of warmth. "Is that how you greet your family?" Cecily sneered, drifting up the stairs. She looked older, harder. The innocence of the debutante had curdled into something sharp. "We were on our way to the springs at Bath. Father said the air would be good for my nerves, after the stress of the wedding, you know. We simply had to stop. We couldn't pass by without seeing how our dear Beatrice is managing her castle." She said castle the way one might say prison "You cannot stay," Beatrice said firmly. "The house is undergoing renovations. It is not fit for guests." "Nonsense!" Honoria pushed past her, her shoulder checking Beatrice hard. "We are not guests. We are family. And I am parched. I require tea, Earl Grey, and tell the cook to prepare a light supper. No heavy meats." They swept into the great hall before Beatrice could stop them. The invasion had begun. For the next hour, Beatrice felt as though she were walking on a tightrope over a pit of vipers. She ushered them into the drawing room, furthest from the north wing. She ordered tea. She sat stiffly as Honoria complained about the dust, the draught, the lack of gas lighting, and the gloomy portraits. But it was Cecily who terrified her. Cecily didn't sit. She prowled. She walked around the room, trailing her fingers over the furniture, her eyes darting everywhere. She looked like a cat sensing a mouse in the walls. "It's so big," Cecily mused, picking up a silver snuff box and examining the hallmark. "And so empty. The servants in the village were whispering, you know." Beatrice poured tea, her hand steady only through sheer force of will. Village gossip is rarely accurate. "They say the Duke orders enough food for a regiment," Cecily said, turning to face her stepsister. A small, cruel smile played on her lips. "And that he buys medicines, strange medicines, laudanum, valerian root, things for hysteria." Beatrice's cup rattled against the saucer. "Sebastian suffers from migraines. The sea air aggravates them." "Does he?" Cecily hummed. "How tragic. Or perhaps he isn't the one who is sick." "Sit down, Cecily," Honoria snapped. "You are making me dizzy." "I need to powder my nose," Cecily announced. She dropped the snuff box back onto the table with a loud clatter. "Where is the retiring room? Or do I have to use an outhouse in this ruin?" "Second door on the left, down the main corridor," Beatrice said quickly. "Do not wander. The West Wing floors are being revarnished." "I'm not a child, Beatrice," Cecily scoffed. She swept out of the room. Beatrice waited 10 seconds, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mother," she said, standing up, "I must check on the kitchen. Excuse me." She didn't wait for Honoria's reply. She walked calmly to the door, closed it, and then broke into a run. She didn't go to the kitchen. She ran toward the stairs. She knew Cecily. She knew that curiosity in her stepsister was a disease that ate away at boundaries. Beatrice reached the landing and saw it, the door to the corridor connecting the main house to the north wing. It was ajar. The lock hadn't been picked. In the chaos of Elise running to hide, she must have failed to latch it fully. "No," Beatrice whispered. She sprinted down the stone corridor, the sound of her footsteps echoing like gunshots. The air grew colder as she neared the tower. She heard the scream before she reached the door. It wasn't a scream of pain, but of pure, animalistic terror. Beatrice burst into the nursery. The scene froze in her mind like a tableau of cruelty. The late afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. In the corner, wedged between a wardrobe and the wall, Elise was curled into a tight ball, her hands over her ears, rocking violently. Standing over her, poking her shoulder with the tip of her parasol as if prodding a dead animal, was Cecily. "Stop it!" Beatrice screamed. She flew across the room, grabbing Cecily by the shoulders and hurling her back. Cecily stumbled, catching herself on the piano bench. "I knew it!" Cecily shrieked, her face flushed with the ecstasy of victory. She pointed a trembling finger at Elise. "I knew there was a secret. It's the sister, the dead sister. She's not dead. She's a monster." "She's not a monster." Beatrice stood before Elise, shielding her body with her own. "She is ill. She is harmless." "She's a lunatic," Cecily laughed, a high, jagged sound. "Oh, this is rich. This is better than a mistress. This is treason, Beatrice. Faking a death? Hiding a mad woman? The Duke of Blackwood, harboring a dangerous mental patient in a house full of servants? Imagine the headlines." "You will say nothing," Beatrice hissed. "I will say everything," Cecily countered, stepping closer. "Unless—" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Unless what?" The voice came from the doorway. It was deep, guttural, and vibrated with a rage so profound it felt physical. Sebastian stood there. He had clearly run from the study. His chest was heaving, his hair dishevelled. But his eyes were fixed on Cecily with the intensity of a predator watching prey. Cecily faltered for a second, shrinking back under his gaze. But then she looked at the cowering figure of Elise and regained her confidence. She had the ace of spades. "Your Grace," Cecily said, her voice dripping with mock politeness. "We were just discussing the amenities of your home. It seems you have a guest who shouldn't exist." Sebastian took a step forward. "Get out." "I don't think I will," Cecily said. She smoothed her dress. "You see, Mother and I are in a bit of a financial pinch. The season was so expensive. And silence. Well, silence is a commodity, isn't it? Just like coal or wool." Sebastian stopped, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You are trying to blackmail me?" "I am offering you a business arrangement," Cecily smiled. £5,000 in cash, today, and another 1,000 every year on my birthday. A small price to pay to keep your dear sister out of Bedlam, because you know that's where she'll go. The authorities don't take kindly to unregistered lunatics. They'll chain her to a wall, Sebastian. They'll put her in a cage." Behind Beatrice, Elise whimpered, a sound of utter despair. Sebastian flinched, as if he had been struck. The colour drained from his face. He looked at Elise, his fragile, broken sister, who had just started to heal. He knew Cecily was right. If the law got involved, he would lose her. His power, his title, none of it could stop the machinery of the asylum system. The Wolf of Blackwood was trapped. Sebastian's voice broke. He looked at the floor, defeated. "I will get the money. It is in the safe in the library." "Excellent," Cecily beamed, twirling her parasol. "I knew you were a reasonable man." "No." The word was spoken softly, but it cut through the room like a knife. Cecily rolled her eyes. "Oh, be quiet, Beatrice. The men are talking business." I said no. Beatrice stepped away from Elise. She stepped away from the wall. She walked into the center of the room, positioning herself between her husband and her stepsister. She looked at Sebastian. He was broken, ready to surrender everything to save his sister. He was operating out of love and fear. But Beatrice was not afraid. Beatrice was angry. She turned to Cecily. Her posture changed. The slump of the past her prime spinster vanished. She stood tall, her chin raised, radiating a cold, imperious authority that matched the Duke's own. "You will not get a penny, Cecily," Beatrice said, her voice steady and low. "And you will never speak of this again." Cecily scoffed, crossing her arms. "You think you can stop me? You're just a wallflower, Beatrice. You're nothing. I hold all the cards." Beatrice reached into the hidden pocket of her gown. Her fingers closed around a piece of paper she had carried with her every day since her marriage. A piece of paper she had hoped never to use, but had kept for exactly this moment. "You think you hold the cards?" Beatrice asked, a dangerous glint entering her grey eyes. "My dear sister, you aren't even playing the same game." She pulled the paper out. "Let's talk about debt, shall we?" The silence in the nursery was absolute. Even the dust motes seemed to hang suspended in the air, waiting. Cecily Wulfric stared at the folded parchment in her stepsister's hand. A flicker of doubt crossed her face, quickly replaced by a scoff. She tossed her blonde curls, regaining her composure. "You're bluffing," Cecily sneered. "What could you possibly have? A diary entry about how mean I was to you when we were 12? Please, Beatrice, put the paper away and let the Duke sign the check." "It isn't a diary entry," Beatrice said, her voice terrifyingly calm. She didn't shout. She didn't tremble. She unfolded the document with deliberate slowness, the crisp paper crinkling loudly in the quiet room. "And I am not bluffing. I am doing business. Isn't that what you called this? A business arrangement?" Sebastian watched his wife. He had never seen her like this. The woman who had blended into the wallpaper at the Rutherford ball was gone. In her place stood a queen, cold and hard as a diamond. "Do you recognize Father's signature?" Beatrice asked, holding the document out just far enough for Cecily to see the ink, but not grab it. Cecily squinted. Her face went pale. "I told you I manage the household accounts," Beatrice said, beginning to pace slowly around the room, circling her prey. "But my duties did not stop at the butcher and the baker. When Sebastian gave me my allowance, £5,000 a year, he told me to do with it as I pleased." She stopped directly, behind Cecily. "I didn't buy dresses. I didn't buy jewels. I went to the moneylenders in Cheapside, the ones Father visits when the gaming tables turn against him." Cecily spun around. You went to the sharks?" "I bought the debt, Cecily," Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "All of it. The mortgage on the townhouse in Chesterfield Street, the loans for the carriage, the credit lines at the modiste. I own them. I own the roof over your head. I own the silk on your back. I own you." Cecily took a stumbling step back, hitting the piano. "Mother won't let you." "Mother has no money," Beatrice snapped, her patience finally snapping like a dry twig. "She lives on credit that I now control. This is a foreclosure notice, effective immediately." Beatrice held up the paper like a sword. "Here is my counteroffer. Listen closely, because I will not repeat it." Cecily was shaking now, the arrogance draining out of her like water from a cracked vase. "You will leave this house this instant," Beatrice commanded. "You will take your mother, and you will go. You will never speak of Elise. You will never speak of Sebastian's private affairs. If I hear a whisper, if I see a single blind item in the gossip columns, I will enforce this notice." Beatrice leaned in, her grey eyes burning. "I will seize the townhouse. I will seize your assets. You, mother and father, will be on the street within 24 hours. You will be destitute. You will be forced to work in a workhouse, scrubbing floors until your hands bleed. And we both know, my dear sister, that you do not have the constitution for manual labor." "You wouldn't," Cecily whispered, tears of fear welling in her eyes. "We're family." "Family," Beatrice laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Family protects each other. You came here to destroy us for money. You are not family, Cecily. You are a bad investment. And I am liquidating it." "Get out," Sebastian added. His voice was quiet, but it carried the finality of a gavel strike. Cecily looked from the Duke to the Duchess. She looked at the paper in Beatrice's hand, the paper that held her life in the balance. She realized with a sickening jolt that she had walked into the lion's den and poked the wrong lion. I want to leave," Cecily stammered. "Run," Beatrice said. Cecily didn't need to be told twice. She hitched up her skirts and fled. They heard her boots clattering down the stone hallway, followed by a frantic shriek for her mother. Beatrice stood statue still, listening. She heard the front doors slam. She heard the carriage driver being shouted at. Finally, she heard the wheels tear away down the gravel drive, the sound fading into the distance until there was only the wind on the moors. Only then did Beatrice lower the paper. Her knees gave way. She would have fallen if Sebastian hadn't caught her. He was there in an instant, his strong arms wrapping around her waist, holding her up. He didn't speak. He simply held her, burying his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in the scent of her lavender soap. "Is she gone?" Elise asked from the corner, her voice small. Beatrice pulled away from Sebastian gently and went to the girl. She knelt down, disregarding the dirt on the floor, and took Elise's hands. "She's gone. She can never hurt you again. I promise." Elise looked at Beatrice, then at Sebastian. For the first time in years, the haunted look in her eyes receded, replaced by a flicker of safety. "I'll take her to her room," Sebastian said hoarsely. "Mrs. Vance can sit with her." An hour later, Beatrice sat in the library, staring into the fire. The adrenaline had crashed, leaving her exhausted. The door clicked open and locked. Sebastian walked in. He didn't go to his desk. He walked straight to her chair, pulled over an ottoman, and sat at her feet. The Duke of Blackwood, the most feared man in London, looked up at his wife with an expression of raw, unguarded reverence. "You bought their debts," he said, as if he still couldn't quite believe it. "I knew they would come," Beatrice admitted, tracing the pattern on the armrest. "I didn't know when or how, but I knew they wouldn't let me go without trying to take something from me. I wanted to be the one holding the leash. You used the allowance I gave you to buy your freedom. To buy our freedom, Sebastian." Sebastian took her hand, turning it over to kiss the palm. "I married you because I thought you were practical. I thought you were safe. I thought I could keep you at arm's length and protect Elise on my own." He looked into her eyes. The ice in his gaze had completely melted, revealing a depth of emotion that took Beatrice's breath away. "I was a fool," he whispered. "You are not safe, Beatrice. You are dangerous. You are magnificent. Today you were not just a wife. You were a fortress." "I was terrified," Beatrice confessed, a tear slipping down her cheek. "So was I," Sebastian said. He reached up, wiping the tear away with his thumb. "I have spent 5 years living in the dark, freezing everyone out to keep my secret. I thought I was strong enough to bear it alone. But I wasn't. I was drowning, Beatrice. And then you walked into the ballroom in that grey dress, and you pulled me to the surface." He stood up and pulled her to her feet. "I do not want a marriage of convenience anymore," he said fiercely. "I do not want a business partner. I want you. I love you. I love your mind. I love your courage. And I love that you are the only person in the world who can bring me to my knees." Beatrice's heart soared, lighter than air. "I love you too, Sebastian, even if you are a bit brooding." He laughed, a deep, booming sound that chased the last shadows from the corners of the room. He kissed her then, not with the polite restraint of a contract, but with the consuming passion of a man who had finally found his home. "You are the Duchess of Blackwood," he murmured against her lips, "and God help anyone who crosses you." The scandal that Cecily Wulfric had hoped for never came to pass. Instead, a different kind of rumour spread through London, that the Duke of Blackwood and his wife were a force of nature. Elise lived a long, peaceful life at Blackwood. She never returned to society, but her music did. Beatrice sent her compositions to a publisher in Vienna under a pseudonym. When the Lady of the Moors became a celebrated composer, only 3 people knew the truth. As for the Wulfrics, they were quietly retired to a small, damp cottage in Cornwall. Beatrice provided a stipend, just enough to keep them fed, but not enough for carriage rides or silk dresses. Cecily married a local clerk, a man with no title and no patience for her tantrums, and the Duke and Duchess, they became legends. They filled Blackwood Hall with children, dogs, and noise. They were inseparable, ruling their estate with a mix of iron will and open hearts. Every year, on the anniversary of the night they met, Sebastian would clear the furniture from the library. He would bow to his wife, the woman they called past her prime, and ask for a dance. And as they waltzed by the firelight, Beatrice knew the truth. She had never been waiting to be plucked like a flower. She had been waiting to grow her roots, deep and strong, in the only soil that could hold her. The wallflower had bloomed, the wolf had been tamed, and they lived, quite happily, ever after. And that is the story of Beatrice and the Duke. She proved that a woman's worth is not written on a calendar, and that the quietest people often hold the loudest power. Beatrice didn't just save herself, she saved an entire family from the darkness. I hope this story reminded you that it is never too late to find your strength or your happiness. If you enjoyed The Duchess of Last Resort, please give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. Share it with a friend who loves a good victory, and subscribe so you don't miss our next historical tale. What did you think of Beatrice's revenge? Was it too harsh, or exactly what Cecily deserved? Let me know in the comments below. I'll see you in the next story.